So the coaching process actually starts with just the way of being, how the coach shows up. That it starts with taking this orientation of a no-fault, judgment-free orientation, and then the strengths-building orientation of really looking for strengths, and that we're that way in all our interactions, not just when we're in a coaching interaction, but that's our way of being with the whole faculty or with that teacher, whether we're passing them in the hall or seeing them in the lunchroom. That we are always looking to create a safe space, to be trustworthy. And so building trust and rapport is a part of building coaching presence so that we can create the safety where a person can take risks. Because learning is a risky business. We have feelings of incapability or being embarrassed about things not going as smoothly as we'd hoped. So anytime we're trying something new, it puts us into a state of some risk. And so that safety and the trust between the coachee and the coach is really essential. There's some other elements of coaching presence as well. And one is just showing up with a sense of calm assurance. That the energy of coaching is one of, I know you can do it. I know we're going to get there. So if it takes us a little longer, if whatever the journey looks like, I am coming to it with the orientation that you have the capability to bring this about. Really that we engage in this with a sense of playfulness and some humor in that. So even though the work we're doing is very serious, we care very deeply about helping teachers to improve because we care about the outcomes for kids. And these kids are not going to have another chance to do the learning they're doing today. And so we can become impatient when we see that things aren't going as well as we might hope as coaches, when the teacher might be impatient with themselves. But so bringing a little bit of lightheartedness to this process can be helpful in that it tends to help us to be more creative and to think outside the box if we can get a little playful in this process. So those are just some of the ways, things we want to keep in mind just in our way of being as coaches.
A word about then the story part of this process. Everything is a story in some sense of the word. When you got together and talked about the experience of making your paper airplanes, you were telling a story. You were telling the things you liked and that you didn't like, and the things that were, fun for you or difficult for you, and you had feelings as to some things that were maybe awkward and ways in which perhaps you didn't want to show that you didn't quite know how to do this as well as someone else. When we work with teachers, that's what we start with, meaning they have a story to tell as to what their experience has been. Even when we have shared the experience, because we have perhaps observed them in the classroom, they have a story to tell as to what they went through. We may have a story to tell as to what we saw, but it all starts with a story. And one of the things that we work with in this frame, and it's not unfamiliar when it comes to the body of knowledge with appreciative inquiry, is the notion that since we develop these stories, we can play with these stories, and we can experience new things through these stories. Learning how to listen to stories is a first coaching skill that we work with in this whole process. So we focus a lot on listening and learning how to not just pay attention, but how to suspend judgment, and how to then move it in some new directions. And the last piece of our story puzzle is that we call it imaginative listening, where we get people to certainly tell their story just like we normally do, but then we will ask them, for example, well, you know, if you were going to tell that same story from the vantage point of one of your students, how would that student tell the story? And we actually encourage people to retell the story from someone else's perspective. It's also called perspective taking. Another opportunity that you have with stories is around what we call a pivot point, where you may have made a decision and you're going to take it in a particular direction. And if you've made that decision to take it in a particular direction, you could have gone in a different direction. And so you can imaginatively just pretend, well, what if I had made a different decision at that point? What might have happened? And tell the story as if it might have happened that way. Then we switch over to empathy.
Well, while you're listening to the story, the coach's orientation is one of empathy. And empathy differs from sympathy in that it's not emotional contagion. We're not trying to get to the space where we're feeling what the other person is feeling. And it's not pity. We're not feeling sorry for the person, even if they're telling us a difficult tale. The story has some pain in it. But empathy is a respectful understanding of another person's perspective, of their experience. And so we bring a particular skill set to that form of empathy that we talk about in this process. And that is based around 4 distinctions that we make. The first is a distinction of observation versus evaluation. And that's one that I think you probably are familiar with. The second distinction is the distinction between feelings and thoughts. And this again, our thoughts are where our judgments lie. And so we are trying to pay attention not to what the teacher is thinking about other people or thinking about themselves in that judgmental orientation, but what are they feeling? And so we're listening for that, and they may tell us, I was so frustrated, I was angry, I was upset, and so they lay it right out for us, or we may need to make some guesses. I'm guessing that you're pretty frustrated right now, or you're kind of annoyed. And then the third distinction is between needs and strategies. And so we can get attached not only to versions of right and wrong, but to what must be done to correct the situation or to move forward. And the orientation towards needs help us to be more expansive in our orientation, because we're not attached to there's just only one strategy that's available to me in this moment that's going to help me feel better or to deal with the feelings that I'm having. So in this process, by drilling down and saying, what's the universal need that's driving what's going on right now, we then can cook up a much larger array of strategies to meet that need. The final distinction is requests versus demands. And the distinction between a request and a demand is not whether you say pretty please with sugar on top. It's not about how politely it is offered. The distinction between a request and a demand has to do with what happens, what's the reaction if the person were to say no. Okay, if no is not an option, then no matter how sweetly you've made the request, it's still a demand. You're still insisting. And the problem with demands is that they tend to cook up autonomy needs in the person that we're interacting with. So they just tend to get a little bit resistant as soon as they sense that they don't have choice. These specific distinctions, as we're offering back what we're hearing from the teacher, or as we're engaging with them around their story. Again, not editing what they're saying, but being careful on what we're offering so that we're trying to stay clear in our own communication styles to be making these 4 distinctions.